All right.
Jack Shamel.
I think everybody is back.
Yes.
Good. Okay. Would like to the guest speaker that I had arranged for this afternoon called me yesterday and apologized profusely that they couldn't attend, and he sent me his information and asked me if I would do my best to present it. Fortunately, it's material that I use in my work with clients, and so I'm going to do the best I can to present it, and hopefully you will get a lot of information out of it. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And the topic for today is, rethinking customer discovery and how that relates to developing the best possible products and services. Hold on just a second. Let me. Okay. Can everybody see my screen?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay. All right. The current paradigm is that, well, shoot, wait a minute. Let me. Here we go. Okay. Well, I'm having technical difficulties, so bear with me a second. All right. Okay. Can everybody see my screen?
Yep. Yep.
Okay. I'm not sure what's going on here. Okay. Okay, I think I got it now. All right, in the current paradigms, which is historically been about getting groups together or getting founding teams together and doing pure brainstorming, throwing around and putting out on the table a lot of ideas and generating those ideas. The other one, as most of you are probably more aware, is lean startup methodology, where you're given a roadmap or a template that basically says go out and ask customers what they want and then design products and services to give them that. And at a high level, that's fine, well, and good. And that's conceptually the roadmap and the steps that you probably should take to get to an endpoint. The problem with the current paradigms is, number one, they spend relatively little time focused on getting to know the customer and everything about the customer. Two is that you've got to come to the table with a reasonably defined problem and at least one potential solution. Then making assumptions about customer needs and wants. And then four, going out and talking to customers about those needs and wants and evaluate the responses and go through an iterative refinement process. Unfortunately, too often when we go out and start asking questions of customers, we do so with a presupposed or a pre-populated mindset that what we think their problem is in fact their problem. And second is that we think that our solution is what they need. So all of our questioning has a tendency of leading the customer to answering questions that may not lead to the best possible outcomes. And the weaknesses, just talked about some of them. There are two things here that want to focus on. One is that we typically talk to customers. We don't necessarily talk to groups of customers. And in my work, I have found that many times customers and groups of customers don't really know what they want, and they rarely can agree on what they need, especially when it comes to groups or segments of customers. So the final point I wanted to make is that typically Q&A with customers focuses on a singular homogenized population as opposed to digging into and segmenting different groups within that customer population. And there was a study done about 5 years ago that looked at the way that customer discovery and product development and its success. And so the metrics and statistics were pretty surprising, and that is 72% of all new product and service introductions failed to live up to their expectations. Two, only 5 to 8 out of approximately 300 new products put something on and contribute something toward company growth. And less than 1%, plus or minus, of new products failed to recoup their development costs. And the surprising thing for me was that only 11% of all product ideation and companies that go through the traditional paradigm receive any kind of a venture investment, and those venture investments fail to produce any kind of a significant liquidity event. So to increase the success of our customer discovery and product and service development, we have to change the paradigm a little bit. And decades ago, Steve Jobs was quoted as saying, "You can't ask customers what they want, then try to give that to them, because by the time you get it built, they'll want something new." So instead of the old way of framing the issue, frame it in a slightly different issue, which is first start by asking companies, instead of what they want, but how they measure success when executing and completing the job for which they hired our product or service to do. And the easiest way to explain that is that customers really don't want a quarter-inch drill. That is a means to an end. Their end is they want a quarter-inch hole. And the current model now boils and focuses around two paradigms. One is called jobs to be done theory, or JTBD. The other one is called outcome-driven innovation. And both of these have their roots that go way back to the principles of the Six Sigma process, where you iterate and you dig deep into process improvements. And what they've done is now applied it to the innovation, customer discovery, and product development process. The jobs to be done component of this is the theory of the framework. And the ODI, or outcome-driven innovation, is the process by which the theory is applied. And what it does is it provides an analytical and definitive framework and process for categorizing, defining, capturing, organizing, and prioritizing customer needs, and then prioritizing everything that follows thereafter. Real brief history. The whole concept of jobs to be done and ODI was developed by a gentleman by the name of Tony Alwick, who ultimately went on to create the firm called Stratagem. And he introduced ODI in 1990 and received one of the first of 12 patents on the process back in 1999. Then he teamed up with Professor Clay Christensen, who really popularized the concept in his paper called Jobs to be Done Theory. And then a third gentleman, a guy by the name of Jay Haynes of a company called Thrive, has taken it and has improved upon it and is now virtualizing parts of the theory in the process. And the interesting thing that I found out in my research is that JTBD and ODI are being used almost exclusively at very large or Fortune 5,000 companies. And there's been very little work done on it or with it in the world in which we work in our ecosystem. And the foundation of jobs to be done theory revolves around asking 9 critical questions. And several of these sound familiar. Who is and are our customer or customers? What jobs is the customer trying to get done? What are all the potential customer influences that may participate in the job? What are the customer's desired outcomes? And how do they measure those outcomes? What do they consider to be valuable and successful if completed properly? And then are there segments of customers that have different unmet needs? What unmet outcomes exist in each segment? And what segments and unmet outcomes should we target for growth? And then the last 2 involve taking that information, forming our value proposition, and then developing products and services around that information. And I'll restate the old paradigm comparisons. And part of this study was also that an independent study was done where they found that companies that used the JTBD ODI process had an 86% success rate in customer discovery and moving that customer discovery through products and services that either significantly impacted the company, recovered their product development costs, or led to a significant capital liquidity event. And I'm sure you've all seen this, which is the standard lean business model canvas. And it goes through it goes through 9 total components. I won't spend a lot of time going through each one of them, but one of the important things that you need to look at is that if you really dive into it, you're looking nowhere in here do you see anything about identifying, defining customer needs or segments of customer needs. In the jobs to be done model, it refines down the 9 different steps into just 6, where it identifies right up front who the job executor is, or the end user, the customer, and then identifying what is the core job to be done, not necessarily the product that they want to complete the job, but the job that they want done. And then part of this is also looking at job consumption jobs, meaning that for every job to be done, there are a whole series of steps, one or more of which we all go through to acquire the ultimate product or service that we want to execute the job. Things like acquiring, purchasing, receiving, learning how to use it, interfacing with it, all the way down to maintaining, repairing, upgrading, etc. And then there's also another category of jobs that are called the emotional, here, let me go through here. I'm sorry. Go back to the job executor, the end user, the customer, those who buy the product and service that we want done. And then the core functional jobs. And I apologize for jumping around. This is the job that the primary job the end user wants to get done, which is the core functional job. And then developing a defining single statement about the job, i.e., I want the job, I want to cut a piece of wood in a straight line, or I want to monitor a patient's vital signs. And the difference between the current paradigms and this is that to be sure we have an accurate functional definition of the job has to be stable. It doesn't change over time. The job is always the job. There are no geographical boundaries to the job. And the job is solution agnostic. And I mentioned some consumption chain jobs. Each one of these could possess within it a set of distinct primary jobs to be done. But these are all elements that will impact how the customer wants the job or gets the job done. And then where I jumped around is there are also related emotional and social jobs that need to be factored into. You know, what other related functional jobs is the executor trying to get done? Generally, there may not be just one job. The other thing is that a significant part of getting a job finished is the emotional and social aspect of things. Things like, how am I going to feel, or how is the customer going to feel when they successfully complete the job, and how are they going to be perceived by others? And we all know that we like to be congratulated on a job well done. Well, these are all factors that go into defining and influencing how the job is framed. The key difference here is once we have those elements initially outlined, there are 8 steps to go through a job map. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time going through each one, but they are defining the job, getting very clear on the definition, locating all the resources and materials needed to do the job, preparing, taking whatever steps are necessary, confirming that we have everything that's needed and that things are prioritized, then executing the job, monitoring the performance, modifying the process, procedure, and resources necessary as we go along, and then finally concluding and wrapping up the job. By laying out customer discovery in this way, we have now taken and begun to develop a scientific method and a definitive roadmap to creating and mapping out customer needs and desires. And then finally, are coming up with the desired outcome segments. And this relates to the core and the consumption jobs. And there are really 4 quadrants, with the 5th being that the job is currently appropriately served. And for that, there is really nothing that needs to be done, because the customer is happy with the current way and the value that the job is being done. And then you have 4 quadrants. One is overserved segment, where the job is not important, but yet it's still being highly satisfied. An irrelevant job is one where it's neither important nor is it being satisfied, and it really could be ignored for the present time. The 3rd segment is the underserved jobs, and it's the underserved and the critical jobs where we really want to begin to focus on our work, and that is jobs that are very important and are not well satisfied, or jobs that are absolutely critical that are very important and still are being satisfied, but there are opportunities to create even more satisfaction. And then out of all of this comes the development of the value proposition and product development process. And in order to create a winning value proposition, you have to know why a segment of customers is underserved, the dimensions and the extent to which they're underserved, as well as the depth of them being underserved, and being able to truly define those levels. And then once we are able to do that, we then want to define a value proposition in a way that communicates the intent and ability to address as many, if not all, of the unmet needs. And then finally, we get down to taking the value proposition, the jobs to be done, and now we can use that as the foundation to go back and begin to plug this information in to the business model canvas and begin to develop our products and services around that. So to kind of summarize, it really boils down to jobs to be done, and ODI, or outcome driven innovation, is a different way of thinking and looking at doing customer discovery. And it's focused on really getting down to understanding the jobs that people need and want done, instead of asking them what they want and then building a product around it. Now we're identifying true unmet needs, which could be different than what customers think they want, and then not spending a dime or very little on developing products and services until we've had the opportunity to take all that information, systematize it, prioritize it, and develop a definitive product development roadmap to move forward. I know that has been kind of a whirlwind tour through what we wanted to talk about, or what I wanted to present today, but it's a new way of looking at things, and one that I highly recommend everybody goes through to some degree, because I believe that it will open eyes, it will provide new perspectives on customer discovery and product development, and with the ultimate goal of being more efficient, more effective, getting to market faster with better products and services that create higher value relationships with clients, and putting more money on the bottom line, which, when everything is all said and done, isn't that what we all want? So that being said, ladies and gentlemen, that's my presentation, and I open it up for some Q&A. If you want to, go ahead and unmute yourself, and I'll be happy to answer any questions that I can.
Chris, this is Jason. Just a quick comment. Will this presentation be made available, the slide deck?
I will be more than happy to make it available on the slide deck. Absolutely. Oh, the one thing I wanted to show you is that, and let me go back here. Let me share my screen one more time. On here, I won't do it now. I put at the tail end a series of resources where you can go out and look and find far more information than I've been able to put in this presentation. There's a world of information out there from Tony Ulwick and Stratogen and Clay Christensen, as well as Jay Haynes from Thrive. And I encourage you to go out and download as much of it. There are all kinds of white papers, etc. Tony Ulwick has written a complete book on the whole topic of outcome driven innovation. But yes, to answer your question, Jason, I will make this available to everybody who's on the call today.
Yeah, hi, this is Craig. Would it be possible to give an example of how this has worked in real life?
I was just going to ask about case studies or same thing.
Well, I have one here. I was not able to put it in a, well, let me see if I can, let me see if I can pull it up. I'm just waiting for my computer to open the file. Let me share my screen with you. Okay, can everyone see this?
Yep.
Okay, this is a cheat sheet that Jay Haynes of Thrive put together that kind of differentiate and shows the differences between the current paradigm and the jobs to be done theory. And it starts out by defining the market. In this case, he uses Apple and Google as an example, where customers want a product and your customers want to get a job done. And what he's saying is the customers want a product. So Apple and Google went out and did a map app. And in order to go through the old paradigm, you would, in order to beat them, you'd have to build a better map app. With the jobs to be done way, it's about defining who wants to get the job done, and the job being getting to destinations on time. The second step is identifying your customers. The old way is people buying a product, either on the phone or wherever, versus the people who need to get the job done, and those who will benefit from getting to a destination or one or more destinations faster and more accurately. Sizing up the opportunities. Under the old way, you would look at it, and here you would define it almost as your total addressable market, and that is willingness to pay for the product, which is people who will shell out X dollars to have an app. On the other side, it's the willingness to pay to get the job done, and that is it's a difference in thinking between how many people would pay for an app or for a piece of software to do it versus people who would be willing to guarantee that they could get to each and every destination on time. Then identifying unmet needs under the current paradigm, it really boils down to customers don't know what they want necessarily, and that we have to convince them that they need our map, and that our map does things better or differently than anything else that's out there. Under the unmet needs, customer struggles with the job and how to complete it best. And so they struggle with the optimal sequence of making play and stops. Segmenting the customer. With the old way, one of the segments that Apple and Google used is suburban moms with high household incomes, but yet there is a whole population out there who have an uncommon or a common unmet need of people who need to get to multiple stops or stops in unfamiliar locations. And the population in the old way was around suburban moms, and embedded in that are a series of assumptions about income level and driving patterns, etc. Whereas in the jobs to be done way of thinking, it's about the entire population who has the problem of getting from point A to point B. The next step is analyzing the competition, which is really under the old way, developing a feature by feature comparison between Google Maps and other map applications versus looking at the competition and who provides the fastest and the most accurate way of satisfying the underlying needs. Under generating feature ideas, it's all about brainstorming, and the theory that there are no bad ideas, at least at a 10,000-foot view, versus focusing all of the energy on coming up and generating ideas that are focused exclusively on solving the unmet need. Then the last several steps are calculating the customer value, which is, under the old way, customers typically think in terms of value by the number of features that a particular product has, versus evaluating the product based on how well and how successful it solves the job for which they hired it to do. And then from there, it's prioritizing the roadmap, and that is the example he uses here is that typically the highest paid person in the organization is the one who makes the the final decision as to what the priorities in the development of the product are, versus letting the unmet needs determine the priorities of the development of the product pipeline. And then from there, it's all about messaging, okay? Under the old way, it's about explaining the features and the technology and what they're getting for the dollar that they're spending with this. On the other side of the coin, with the jobs to be done theory, it's all about how well, it's all about communicating how well the product delivers on the job that needs to be done, and how the customer feels and the emotions that that evokes, that the customer then can use to feel good about the decision that they made. And then finally, under project revenue, it's about what's the estimated impact on the key performance indicators as they exist within the organization as it stands now, as opposed to looking at it from what's the added marginal or incremental value that we've added to the customers, to the customer for having gotten the job done successfully and better than anything else that's out on the market. That could be increasing revenue share. It could be new revenue where it didn't exist before. It could be new market share, or it could be simply creating greater long-lasting customer value, which means customer retention, etc. This is but one example that that I could pull up that summarizes a real-world example of the differences between the two. I will say that if you go out and you get a copy of Tony Ulwick's book called Jobs to be Done, Theory and Practice, in there he's got, I believe, a dozen different case studies and examples of how they applied the Jobs to be Done and ODI to Fortune 1000 companies. And I was very stunned by some of the outcomes that they were able to achieve. And so I don't want to spend an incredible amount of time trying to go through those right now. I think you'll find the book a very, very interesting and insightful read, and I highly recommend that you get a copy if you can. That I think in 30 minutes or less, Marjorie, is my answer to your 30-second question. I'm sorry for being so long-winded.
No, it was very good. I'm puzzled, however, and I guess it's just maybe my background, which is marketing, that some of this stuff sounds to me very common sense, but, you know, perhaps it's the type of assignments I've done, and that's not the usual norm.
You're right. There's a lot of common sense here. The problem is that over time, customer discovery has kind of taken on a life of itself. And so there are a lot of people out there that are being trained, not necessarily to think from a common sense approach, but to think about in terms of complexity. And I believe one of the underlying principles behind what Tony developed here is getting it back to common sense. And where I see it an awful lot, going back to what I said, and that is this was designed around Fortune 500 and Fortune 1000 companies, where there are some incredibly ingrained and well-defined existing processes. Within the ecosystem and the world that we live in, a lot of this is a brand new, especially the current paradigms of business canvas, lean startup. So there is a whole population out there who does not have the same historical education and point of reference in terms of common sense, for lack of a better term. And so they're taught to think about things in a different light. And that has a tendency of moving people down a road that hopefully by thinking about things in this fashion, it'll get them back more to a more straightforward, common sense approach.
Hey, question for you.
Yeah,
Why is Utrax update so high? I thought it was only 8 hours.
I'm sorry.
Oh, really? So it's
Max, could you state the question again?
8, 12.
I think Max is doing something else, so I'm just going to respond a little
Oh,
bit
it is what it
to
is.
Marjorie.
Stay. And we'll
While
work from
Max
there.
is talking. You might be able to.
Max,
you
could
might
you
be
please mute yourself?
Well, let's see what they say first, and then we'll go from there.
you might be able to mute him, Chris.
I just did.
Okay.
Thanks, Kim.
Okay. It's all these different tools that everything's in a different spot. So Marjorie, I will just respond to you. So the customer discovery process that's used in Lean Startup and iCore and all these different programs is a beginning point for, and it's a tool that's used with a new company, right? So they're developing a product, and it's appropriate for that. And it's appropriate in other points in a business's life as well. And they do teach you how to approach the asking the right questions. They use a book that's free called Talking to Humans and teach them a whole approach. But a lot of times I think when we're in this business and you know, with your marketing expertise, you know the critical importance of good, solid market research and understanding who your customers are. So I think when you're talking to like Chris's people, right, and some of ours too, with DefTech, the program that I run, they're doing everything in their company. So these kind of reminders to say, hey, you need to take this into consideration. And the other thing I think we see over and over when you get enough years under your belt is a recycling of things, like the whole like design thinking, for example. It's all been done before. We all know how to use these tools. We've been using them for years. They come out of Six Sigma. They come out of all these other things. So the benefit to things like this, like the jobs to be done, which is a tiny little part of the value proposition canvas, it just gives entrepreneurs and business owners some structure around what they need to do, and helps like coming to things like this is really important because it reminds you need to do these things. That's just my take on it and what I've seen over years.
And Kim, you said it beautifully, and that is this, ODI and jobs to be done theory are not to be taken in isolation. It is a tool and series of tools that can very easily be plugged into the things like the business model, the value proposition canvas. But the thing that I love about it is that it if done well, and again, everything has to be done well to work well, and that is that it helps to systematize and dig into the fundamentals behind true customer discovery, in my opinion, better than some of the other resources that are out there. And I think, and I've used this with several clients, and I have found them absolutely gobsmacked, for lack of a better term, by the job, what they did under their paradigm, or say under a lean startup paradigm. Some of them even used iCore. But yet they came back and they said, wait a minute, we just realized that what the customer was telling us was not necessarily what the customer meant. And it's that kind of digging into the detail between what was said and the intent that I think is where jobs to be done and ODI really creates some fundamental value in the process.
I think you're right. And I think part of it is, sometimes I'm sure you've had this, Greg, where you start working with an entrepreneur and they listen to what you say and then they don't do what you just discussed because they know better than you do. So a lot of it, I think, is you just have to keep doing it until you get it right.
Yes.
Yeah, it's all about listening. It's using these more and this less.
Yeah, that's why God gave us 2 of these and 1 of those.
Yes. I have to pop off for another meeting that I'm now late
Sure.
for, but thank you for this.
Kim, thank you for attending.
In a lot of the research and discovery sessions I've had with new clients, over and over, probably 80%, they tell me about what they do and the benefits of what they do. But what they don't tell me about is what they enable, which is exactly what the job the customer needs doing. But the focus is always so much on, this, and this will allow you to do this. It's kind of like starting at the wrong end.
Yep. I agree. Any other thoughts or comments? Okay. Well, I want to thank everybody for participating. And I certainly am not going to keep everybody on here for the sake of running out an extra 30 minutes. My goal was to keep it short, sweet, and to the point, and I hopefully have done that. For those of you who would like to stay around, I love to just connect with each one of you and get to know you a little better. But if you have to drop off or want to drop off, I completely understand. So thank you, everybody, for attending, and I'll be on for the next 30 minutes.